Greetings and welcome to the latest event in the Geese College of Business Teaching and Learning webinar series. I'm Amanda Brantner, Senior Associate Director of Online Programs here at Geese College of Business at the University of Illinois. And I'm excited to be spending the next hour with you. Our faculty experts have developed a series of webinars to address some of the pressing issues businesses face today, from the economic impact of COVID-19 to cybersecurity and ethics. These webinars enable you to be better prepared to succeed and thrive through any number of challenges. Before we get started with Do Data Analysts Need Cookies with Kevin Hartman and Ron Guyman, I want to cover a few housekeeping items related to the Q&A portion of today's session. Please submit all of your questions via the Zoom Q&A feature. Your questions will be submitted publicly for the entire audience to see. In order to develop consensus around questions, please use upvoting. The upvote thumb is located next to the question in the Q&A window. I will bring the top questions to Professors Hartman and Guyman following the presentation. Any general housekeeping questions will be answered in text by the Geese team working in the background. Questions submitted via the chat will not be taken. It's my privilege now to introduce today's presenters, Kevin Hartman and Ron Guyman. Kevin is the Director of Data Analytics for Google's consumer, government, and entertainment sector. He and his team partner with major advertisers, creative agencies, and media companies to develop digital solutions that build businesses and brands. We're also very proud to have Kevin as one of our great faculty members teaching in our IMBA program. Ron Guyman is part of our #1 ranked accounting faculty, as well as Chief Data Officer at Gig, a software company that helps businesses leverage the power of social media to enhance their brand. Ron is passionate about applying data analytics to practical business problems. Since 2015, he has worked as a chief data scientist, partner, chief data officer, and consultant to help companies find actionable insight in their data. He has seen data creep into every part of business and believes that learning a data analytic language is like gaining a superpower. Please join me in welcoming Kevin Hartman and Ron Guyman.
All right. Well, I'm delighted to be here, and I look forward to spending these next few minutes sharing some things that I've learned with you. Kevin and I are going to address the question of whether data analysts need cookies from two different perspectives. While we both work in industry and teach in the IMBA program, we have some different experiences, and so I'm going to focus on what motivates data analysts, what motivates me, and then Kevin will talk about a different type of cookie. Now, I realize that in a talk about data analytics, I should probably have a lot of data to back up the comments I'll make. Unfortunately, I don't. I'm going to be speaking mostly from my personal experiences. All right, so I'll just disclose that up front, that most of this is from my personal experience. Now, there are three things that I hope you come away with, or at least one of three things as a result of this portion, my portion here. And the first one is starting your own journey. I know from my experience with the Geese College of Business that the number of people who want to be able to perform data analytics or manage those who do the data analytics is growing because data is everywhere. And so I hope that I can give you at least a few ideas to start your own journey in becoming proficient in this area. The second point, data analytic ideas. If nothing else, maybe some of the examples that I share will spark an idea for how data can be used in your business or some other aspect of your life. As Amanda mentioned, I see data just creeping into everything we do. And then the third thing is kind of the key thing that's tying all this together is what is it that motivates data analysts? And again, whether you want to be a data analyst and maybe you're already motivated, or if you're just going to manage data analysts or communicate effectively with them, I think it's maybe worthwhile to understand some of the tasks they do and what really influences them. So with respect to the first point about starting your own journey, Here's a quote that I like from one of my favorite fantasy authors. His name is Brandon Sanderson. And this is from a book called The Way of Kings. And in this book, there is a bridge crew, and their job is to carry a bridge ahead of the army and then lay down that bridge so that the army can get across these big chasms in a faster. And so this bridge crew gains a lot of growth and muscles and wonderful experiences as a result of their journey. It's a hard journey though. So I love this quote. He says, "I declare that no accomplishment has substance nearly as great as the road used to achieve it. It is the journey that shapes us. Our calloused feet, our back strong from carrying the weight of our travels, our eyes open with the fresh delight of experiences lived." So wherever you start your data analytic journey from, you're going to have some difficult times. There's going to be some times where you get stuck on something that seems unreasonably long to solve. And it is frustrating, but it is a part of the journey. And I think that you learn things along the way. Now, as teachers of data analytics, we hope that we can kind of be bridge builders and help you get across the chasms faster. But undoubtedly, there will be some points along the way where you get stuck. Now, I'd like to share with you a little bit about my journey, just because it's not a straightforward linear path to where I'm at now. I started out in academics, and about 10 years ago, there was a lot of talk that I started noticing at conferences and business schools about how we can help students make more data-driven decisions. Well, 5 years later, in 2015, my wife and I had a desire to move closer to family. My dad had had a stroke, and we'd been away from family for 13 years. And so that was kind of the driving factor. But I knew that data was so important in data analytics, and I really liked the data analytics side of research. So when an opportunity arose for me to work near family as a data scientist at a growing business intelligence company, my wife and I took a big leap of faith and we went for it. And the next 3 years, I spent completely out of academics, working with a lot of software developers at a company called New Metric, as well as my own little startup, and now at Gig. And during that time, I worked with a lot of clients in a variety of positions and in dozens of industries and companies. And it ranged from large oil manufacturers, computer hardware manufacturers, frozen food companies, advertising companies, online boutiques, departments of transportation, and many others. So it was in some sense a great informal sabbatical, and I learned a ton about, well, I learned a little bit about a lot of other industries. And that's where I really came to realize that data is everywhere in every part of an organization. And even if they have a data scientist, that data scientist just doesn't have time to help with all the data needs throughout an organization. So it awakened for me a passion in data analytics and also to teach it. And then a couple years ago, I joined Geese. And since then, I've been doing more and more teaching in academics. I really enjoy it. And I did enjoy it beforehand, but now I'm teaching data analytics and I really love it. And but I still have a foot in industry, and I hope that's always the case, because there are so many problems, practical problems to solve, and I learn a lot in the process as well. So my path is obviously not going to be the same for probably anyone else, but main thing is that it doesn't have to be linear. Now, times have changed though, and if you want to get into data analytics, I should here put a plug in for some of the things that are available online, especially what we're doing here at Geese. So the first thing I want to mention is, if you have time and you're really interested in developing data analytic skills, I would recommend that you go onto Coursera and do a search for Illinois Analytics, and you'll find 46 different courses that you could take. And you'll also find specializations. And Kevin and I teach in the IMBA program, and we have a specialization in data analytics. And so several courses that all tie together to help you get started into data analytics. And there are also portions, well, if you want university credit for a degree or to sit for the CPA exam, or whatever the case may be, there's also a high engagement portion if you register with the University of Illinois. And Kevin and I will ask you to do more in the high engagement portion, but the benefit is that we will also be there with a team of great people to help you learn what you need to learn to become, at least get started into data analytics and start that journey out. Now, I realize not everyone has time right now. Many of you are working professionals. You don't have time to invest or money to invest in a whole program. So an alternative route is something that we call the Business Analytics Academy. And this route is much smaller bite-sized chunks of learning. And so you can essentially take, we call them skills. It's a course, but a skill that takes about 3 to 4 hours to complete. And these are completely self-guided. And we currently have 15 business analytics skills. So here's a list of some of the names of those skills: data and its properties. So you can see by the names on here that it's just getting started into business analytics. So what about in Excel? Yes, you can do some data analytics in Excel. And so we introduced those topics in Excel, and then we use Tableau and then R, help you get started into R. And then we move on to more advanced topics like time series forecasting and conjoint analysis and so forth. So now, I don't want this to be purely a commercial for Illinois. I love Illinois and Geese, what we're doing, but you could just search YouTube and find plenty of online support there as well. So there's lots of ways that you could get started into data analytics that would probably meet anyone's schedule if you're motivated enough to do it. All right, and one way that I want to suggest as a way to get started into data analytics is to find a problem that is important to you and work for a solution to that problem. So Sue Grafton is an author. I've never read any of her books, but the thought that came to my mind is ideas are a dime a dozen. And she says this more eloquently. She says, ideas are easy. It's the execution of ideas that really separates the sheep from the goats. So I think if you're motivated to solve a problem, you're going to learn what it is that you need to learn to solve that problem. So as an example, here are some tasks that I've worked on, a few that I've worked on from my personal life as well as work life. And I want to point out that not all tasks have to be related to machine learning. So automation tasks, for instance, just automating, maybe it's transferring data from one place to another, that saves so much time. That can be a life changer in my experience. And so I want to share with you an experience that I had ever since I was 16 and first started driving. My dad taught me to keep a log of any kind of maintenance or when I put gas in the car. The idea was that I'd be able to keep track of when the mileage was decreasing. Well, I did that faithfully for a long time, but I never really used the mileage portion of it. Well, about 5 years ago, I thought, why don't I start recording this in Google Sheets? And so I did that, and I was like, well, I want to see what the mileage is. I've got this. I'm going to start tracking this. And so I set up a script to go and fetch the data from that Google Sheet. And it was pretty basic. It's just, and I still do it actually, it's just the mileage, the date, the location, the odometer, and how many gallons of gas and what the cost is, and the octane. And so I've been recording that for all my cars, and I teach my son to do that as well, and who's driving. And anyway, so I set up this script to go and get the data and kind of create a report for me. Whenever we fill up a car, it fetches the data, and then it looks, okay, if this happened in the last day, then I'm going to email this report to Ron. And it tells me just some summary information about the cars that we have, such as the miles per day, the cost per mile, the cost per year, the maintenance events that are coming up within the next 60 days. So you can see our Odyssey, we need an oil change and a tire rotation, expected to be towards the end of January. And then a little bit more detail about each car. So for our Odyssey, there's the mileage, and then I love charts, and so a graph about a rolling average for the miles per gallon for the Odyssey and the Corolla and so forth. All right, so anyway, that was one task that I was motivated it just out of curiosity more than anything, and wanting to make my personal life a little bit more fulfilling. Now, also related to that, I was curious, is higher octane worth the price? So thinking of an interesting task, just kind of my own personal research question. Well, so I did an experiment, and over the course of a year, I filled my tank with alternating between 85 and 91 octane gas. And then at the end of that year, I did an analysis, a regression analysis to control for some other things, and found out that a higher octane gas, the 91 octane gas, did improve the mileage in my car, my Corolla. but it was only worth about 10 cents per gallon, not the 30 cents per gallon extra that they charge. So even in the short term, it wasn't worth it. And so I have a little bit more confidence now in saying, no, I don't need to pay for the 91 octane. Haven't figured out for the 87 octane yet, but maybe I'll do that at some point. Another interesting thing that I used to apply data analytics for, and was motivated to use data analytics for, was just looking at this COVID information. So I created this dashboard. I'll have to reload this here, but I did this for a class to use as an example. And this is actually out there. You can, anyone can go and use it, and we can provide the link later. But the password is geese, by the way. It doesn't matter what your name is, but the password is geese. And what's happening here is on a daily basis, my computer is going and fetching data from the Johns Hopkins University, from other places. And I really wanted to find out, are the COVID rates, we'll get a little bit different picture, answer my own questions, like how is it, what is the rate in terms of population? And how is it varying across the world? And so I made this dashboard, and the cool thing about dashboards is that they're interactive. And so if I want to just look at what's happening in the US, I can click on US there, and it'll filter the data down to just the US. If I want to compare the US to Brazil, I could do that. And here's a cumulative cases starting on a day when cases are 100. And I could look at it on a per capita basis because our populations aren't the same, and everything updates. I could also look at each state in the United States and look at the death rate and see where it's the lowest and the highest. And so all these questions, and this dashboard allows me to real quickly explore the data and make some comparisons. I even wanted to look at how is the COVID rate related to stock prices. And so I gathered some stock price data on a daily basis, going out and fetching this data and then saving it in a database, and then it's looking at the correlations here, and also, for instance, if we want to look at this spike here in towards the middle of October in Zoom, I can filter that and then click on this here, and this is the top news headlines that are happening during that time. So it gives me a little bit of insight into what's going on, news events that are going on that may be driving some of these stock prices, also somewhat related to COVID. So anyway, just an example of, again, something that I was interested in. And since I wanted to look at stock prices and COVID rates, I was motivated to find where that information is. There's so much out there, and I learned what I needed to learn to perform this task. And by doing that, I learned skills that I can apply to other tasks as well. I also I wanted to reduce some of the inefficiencies with grading, some of the unnecessary tasks. And so I created a tool to help with grading. So anyway, creating something, I think, provides some great motivation for learning data analytics. And there's a quote that I like by a world's religious leader, Dieter F. Uchtdorf, who said, "The desire to create is one of the deepest yearnings of the human soul." And when I think about the single-mindedness that's required to solve a problem with data analytics, and the joy that comes from coming up with a solution to that, it really is satisfying and fulfilling. Here's another quote that I like about creation. This is from Madeleine L'Engle, who probably her most famous book is A Wrinkle in Time. But she said, "Unless we are creators, we are not fully alive. Creativity is a way of living life, no matter our vocation or how we earn our living. Creativity is not limited to the arts or having some kind of important career." So I love the fact that she says it doesn't depend on our vocation. I think for data analytics, it's certainly applicable, but I find that's the case with teaching as well. If I'm creating something new, it's much more satisfying. It's a way of living life. I like it. It's comforting to know it's not limited to the arts, because accounting is probably as far from the arts as you can get, maybe with the exception of actuarial science, but we can still create in these technical disciplines. And finally, we don't have to have an important career. So whether you're a chief data officer or just getting started into data analytics, you can create something. And I would, again, highly recommend that if you're interested in data analytics, that you learn a data analytic language, because it just allows you to automate things and do so much more than if you're pointing and clicking and everything. Now, if you do that, you're going to kind of get into this world, this coding world. And I want to share with you a little bit about what I've noticed motivates coders. Now, at all the companies that I visited some large ones like Overstock.com and Qualtrics and Jane, others that maybe aren't as big, but Jane.com. One thing they have in common is they all have some kind of extrinsic motivating factor, some way to create a really fun environment for the coders who work there. And one of the key things is that they all have amazing pantries. And you look at them, and the pantries are kind of like a combination of the candy aisle and the cereal aisle in grocery stores, and then some fruits and vegetables also scattered throughout there. And I was able to get a picture of some analysts working at two analysts working as software engineers, and here's what the picture is like. So one of these engineers in the top left does not seem to be finding a whole lot of joy, while the other one on the bottom right is. And obviously, these are not real pictures. I'm making that up, but you've probably seen, especially during this COVID time, what it's like when your children or youth or you or others are zoned in, working on something, especially video games. You see this a lot when people are zoned in. There's a look in their eyes, right? And so when you look at these engineers, which one do you think might need a cookie to keep going? Well, certainly this one who looks like he's frustrated. No matter what task we do, I think we hit points where we feel stuck, or we've been doing something for so long that we need a break. And so at those points, some cookies might be a tasty retreat from the mental anguish that we're facing. But what about this other one who's clearly enjoying what she's doing? You think she needs a cookie? I would say yes, but it's for a different reason. I think sometimes data analysts and engineers, when you've got that single-minded focus going, you're so zoned in that you don't want to stop and take a break to eat or to go make something to eat. And so having food readily available, I think, is an important part. They've got a lot kind of at the forefront of their mind that they don't want to drop. And so I think that might be one of the reasons why cookies and other types of perks like that are useful. So wrapping up here, I want to point out that data analytics is a whole lot more than just running fancy algorithms. And we use this FACT framework to help create some kind of general structure for what it takes to turn data into actionable insight. So frame a question, assemble data, calculate results, and tell others about the results. Now, if you were to try to rank these in terms of popularity, these steps, I think calculating results and telling others would be the most popular, as indicated by the size of the cookie next to those. All right, so people hear about things like generative adversarial networks or extreme gradient boosting, and it's essentially magic to them. And they think that you can create something out of nothing, or you show them a cool dashboard and they're so enamored with it that it's like, yes, give me your money. But it doesn't last long. That wears off pretty quickly if it doesn't lead to actionable insight. They're not going to keep paying money if it doesn't lead to actionable insight. And so what I found is that really the time spent on data analytic tasks is very different from what people want from the data analytics. And so assembling data really takes a lot of time. And it really is important to frame a question carefully. So I think that's important to keep in mind, because assembling data isn't necessarily the most rewarding thing either. I think running the algorithms and finding the insight, that's really fun. And so my point is that these steps, each of these steps is really important. And it's important to recognize whether you're a data analyst or managing a team of data analysts, they need some cookies, some extrinsic reward, but for different reasons. All right, so sometimes to help them push through the difficult stuff, other times to help them stay focused on what they're really working on. So I hope that is helpful. I hope you learned something from this. And at this point, I'm going to transition, and I will be pleased to hear now more about the role of data analysts from Kevin Hartman and how they're influenced by website cookies rather than snickerdoodles, one of my favorite cookies.
Yes, it's certainly not as delicious as snickerdoodles, the digital cookies, but certainly important. And thank you, Ron. If Ron kind of talked about the idea of cookies metaphorically as motivation, like Ron said, I'll be talking about something a little more tangible, the actual digital cookies that have become such an important part of the role of the analyst. And we'll take a deeper dive there. Let me go ahead and share my screen. And then we'll get started. Can you all see that? Amanda, maybe just a thumbs up if you can see that.
Hey, Kevin,
good. All right,
see your
here
slides.
we are. Great, thank you, Thomas. Okay, So the way I wanted to frame that up, that conversation as well, the role of digital cookies and how important they are for analysts and where we are today, really has us looking at three different elements, three different sort of chapters, I guess, to the story. One is just a brief look at the rise of data analytics to its modern form, and in that really meteoric rise, the role that data collection has played and the role that digital cookies play inside that context of data collection. Then we'll talk about something that is really contemporary and affecting every business, every consumer, and certainly every analyst today, which is the complexity that data privacy has brought to the environment that we're living in now. And we'll analyze that in the context of digital cookies and what that means for the digital cookies as a tool. Finally, we'll kind of leave with a little bit of a challenge to analysts, and given what we discussed in the first two chapters, where you take your own career from there. And that'll tie in nicely, I think, to the motivations that Ron talked about and the reasons that you may want to take off on this analytic endeavor. So the idea of analytics being important is something that we've been talking about for a long time. This is Michael Fosnot, who is the current CMO of the city of Chicago. If you've seen any of those really delightful Lori Lightfoot ads around the COVID quarantining experience, Michael was the brain behind this. Michael was also the former president of FCB Chicago, my boss and mentor for many years. And way back in 2006, Michael was talking about the geeks in marketing, which really mean the analysts, the data nerds, right? Coming in and just changing the landscape and the environment. He was probably a little bit ahead of his time. Many companies have struggled to determine what is the role of data, how do I use that in my processes for many years, but we're really reaching a point now where it's pretty universally understood that data is important and should be used to drive every decision. The role of the analysts through that time has evolved and changed, certainly, but it's always stayed true to really three functional roles that when they are delivered really do allow for analysts to complete the fact framework that Ron talked about. This idea of being a data strategist, understanding how data fits in the context of a business and how it affects the decisions. The idea of being a techie, being able to use your technical skills to pull data, manage data, analyze that data, do something with it. And then finally, the role of the data designer, being able to tell stories off of that data, right? All these things are important, and the skills as the function of data has evolved, these roles have evolved very much as well. Where we are today is certainly at a point where data is clearly the most important and valuable asset that really any company has, or anyone who is trying to make or even influence a decision can do that better once rooted in data. The landscape has been shifting for a little while, right? Particularly for the marketer, where in the 90s, everything was just .com. We were just getting used to the web. 2000s moved to more personalized individual marketing as we moved to mobile. And finally, where we are today is this idea of machine learning, being able to handle all the data that we have, and the complications there of data privacy. Any marketer today has built a career on understanding their consumer, right? Knowing who that consumer is, knowing what they're thinking, what they like, what they don't like, knowing when they are in their shop, whether that is a virtual shop or a live shop, what that consumer is doing, how they're shopping, what they're looking for, right? Much of that is rooted in intuition and just experience that those marketers have gained over time. It gets a little challenging for some of these marketers, particularly those who have built a long career, when people like me walk in and say, yes, this is certainly your consumer and your customer, right? But this is as well. This is the 160 or so digital touch points that we may see with a consumer who starts to give an indication that they are in market, they're looking for some product before they finally make that decision. Many touch points along the way, many opportunities for brands to influence them and move them in a certain direction. the vast amount of data that we're dealing with, I think we sometimes lose some context for as well. I think we throw around this idea of gigabytes and terabytes, and you really don't. I think it's hard for us to get a good sense for just how much data that is. To answer that question, I put together this quick infographic where I looked at, in a single day, activities that consumers were engaged in that were generating data, and then put them into this infographic, size the boxes according to their relative weight and size. And you see every single day, 6.2 billion YouTube videos viewed, right? 5.8 billion Facebook likes, 5.6 billion Google searches, all these things that become really important for marketers to collect about consumers, to learn about who they are, what's important to them. To add some context here, there's a couple boxes that I haven't revealed yet. The brown box there in the upper right, those are the number of cups of coffee consumed every day on Earth. It's you can literally buy coffee in any country, anywhere on Earth, right? All the other stuff is created by the 50% or so of us who are digitally enabled and online. The two boxes down there in the bottom, well, the red one are the number of votes cast in the UK EU referendum, the Brexit vote, and then the blue one there are the number of votes that we've seen in the 2020 presidential election, which continues to grow with each passing day. Just those things happening every the elections, a presidential election every 4 years, the EU referendum maybe once in a lifetime, everything else happening every single day, just to get a sense for how much data we really are talking about. And much of that data is somewhat passively created. Most of the data, I should say. If you go to either of these URLs, you will see data that is passively being generated by you. That is still very important to marketers, right? The location history piece will show you where you, or at least your device, has been. This is a kind of a typical day for me. I woke up one morning and in the dark red, I went for a run. I got back to my house. I had set aside some flowers at Sheffield Neighbors, a little farmer's market that I came upon. I didn't have money with me when I was on the run, so I hopped in a car in dark blue and drove there, paid for the flowers, wound up going back to Roscoe Square to buy some other things for groceries later in the day. Later that day, I went for a walk in the light blue to Bear Burger and had a burger for lunch with my kids. And then later after that, I took a bike ride in green and went to Scooter's Frozen Custard for an ice cream treat. I didn't tell Google that I was on a bike. I didn't tell them that I was in a car, right? These are things that Google just discern from the data that they have and the information that they're collecting from literally billions of consumers. This kind of data is being generated for all of us all the time. That is vitally important for marketers. And we're trying to, as platforms like Google, make sense of that data for marketers as well by categorizing consumers based on their behaviors and based on the things that they are exhibiting about themselves. This is what you'll see if you go to the second URL too, is that attempt of Google to put you in some categories based on who they think you are and what interests you have. All of these things are really dependent on some of the technical infrastructure that has been built around digital data. And all of these things, this kind of data, has built empires for many of the largest companies operating today. The idea of FAMGA, the Facebook, Apple, Microsoft, Google, and Amazon group of companies, all live in this sort of data, right? In both the creation and the use of that data, even if they are trying in various ways to differentiate their data a little bit, or the way that they utilize that, they're still very much reliant on the data that is being generated. And on top of that, they become tremendously powerful. I think the best way to illustrate the power of these companies is to simply look at Amazon and to look at the sort of market waves that it created when it made the purchase of Whole Foods. To do that, there's a great analysis by a company named L2 that looked at this. And what they looked at was within 24 hours of the announcement that Amazon had purchased Whole Foods, what happened to the remainder of the grocery companies or the other grocery companies operating in that space. And so that's what you see on the far right. Within 24 hours after the purchase of Whole Foods, Amazon stock jumped up 2%. Incidentally, that growth that they received in market cap eclipsed the amount of money they paid for Whole Foods. So there's the argument that maybe they paid for that acquisition simply by saying that they were going to do it, right? But you can see how that affected companies like Walmart, who had a $300 billion market cap, that when this announcement was made, lost literally overnight $15 billion in value. And that's probably not even the biggest, the most, the sharpest illustration, I think, of the power of Amazon. Amazon also in the following day went on to say, like, hey, you know, we're also looking in some other areas. We're looking at dental supplies, prescription drugs, sporting goods. We haven't identified any companies that we want to purchase, but we think we might do something there too. Their stock jumped up another 1%, and it sent companies in those industries, some who had been operating for decades, right, to tremendous losses. An example is CVS, who had an $80 billion market cap before Amazon said that they might purchase some operations in prescription drugs. And CVS saw a 5% drop, or a $4 billion loss overnight as a result of that, right? This ability that these companies have built, both on the data that they've collected and the way that they operate, to really dominate the space that we live in today, I think is well illustrated here. The lifeblood of these companies, all of them to an extent, is the digital ad revenue that they are generating. Some of them, like Google, like Facebook, are creating 90–95% of their revenue through digital advertising. And we're talking about an enormous market. I mean, $400 billion in digital ads are being sold each year. So this ad revenue is tremendously important to those companies. It has been the fuel that has driven their acquisitions and the growth over time, and is frankly, for us as consumers, one of the reasons that, you know, we can continue to use Facebook for free. We can make Google searches for free because of the ad revenue that is generated. That ad revenue and the system that supports it has been affected by privacy. And let me talk a little bit about how that is. It's also complicated the life of analysts, certainly operating in the space as well. There are still, and there remain, a number of types of categories of analysis that we as analysts want to collect and conduct, right? From just a plain descriptive analysis all the way through to predictive analysis. That hasn't changed and that won't change. But what really does provide us the opportunity to do this kind of work and to conduct these sorts of analysis is the data that we're able to collect, right? And much of that data is generated today by cookies. Cookies are the little files that drop on your desktop, right? When you visit a site, it allows analysts who can collect that data to know where you've been, what you've done, actions that you've taken. It gives clear insight into who you are as a consumer. More importantly, and possibly most importantly, it allows for the analyst to say to someone who advertised, you invested this, and this is what you got back. Let me talk about how that happens. When you, as a consumer, go to a web page and an advertisement loads, then that ad drops a cookie on your desktop. When you click on that ad, it modifies the cookie is modified. When you then go out and buy that product that you saw advertised, there's a cookie there as well. Matching those cookies allow for an analyst to say to an advertiser, you bought an ad on this website or through this platform, and you sold a product as a result of it. This allows for a calculation of return on investment. That return on investment is what the platforms who are dependent on digital ad revenue use to continue to earn that digital ad revenue, right? The $400 billion that I talked about a moment ago comes to those platforms because they are able to demonstrate that when people invest in their advertising, they get things in return. They frankly sell products. The picture that we use to tell that story and connect those ad exposures to purchases aren't always complete. Right? There's a number of gaps, places that the data either becomes corrupted or just disappears, or we never had it in the first place. A method to solving those gaps is to model out some of the behaviors that we think are most likely to happen, right? So it's never a perfect picture, but typically we get enough data that it allows us to create a pretty good picture with very good accuracy of how someone, a consumer, has navigated through the web, the behaviors that they took on, and what moved them to ultimately make the purchase that we were so interested in. That picture, completing that again, is reliant on digital cookies. And this is where some of the experiences that we've seen lately has created difficulty and has introduced this problem of privacy, or the challenge of privacy, that is really challenging the cookie infrastructure that we become so reliant on. I think that a really good illustration of this challenge came in a piece by Jeffrey Fowler, who wrote an article for the Washington Post, and he did a little bit of an investigation into the use of cookies and how many cookies were being generated on his desktop as he was going around the web. And there was a little bit of sensationalism there as well, as he was being followed around. You can see in the picture there by these people dressed in white and black who represented digital cookies and were causing all sorts of trouble and havoc for him. But the main reaction that we have seen from that sort of the challenges that cookies have introduced and the privacy reaction have come in the form of legislation. We've seen GDPR in the European Union. We've seen a California regulation be introduced that is still somewhat taking shape. And then finally, and most importantly, we have seen a swift reaction from Apple to introduce what they call intelligent tracking prevention, ITP. And what ITP does is block the use of cookies on Apple devices to secure for Apple users a little more privacy on their device. This really was motivated mostly by some misuse of Apple data, particularly by Facebook. Facebook was found to be surveying people and paying them for their web logs, some of them as young as 13 years old. Apple told them to stop. Facebook said, we won't. And then the next day, or very shortly thereafter, Apple introduced a very capricious version of the ITP program that really deleted all of these cookies out. So to see that effect, remember, as I talked about, when you see an ad, there's a cookie drop, right? When you do something with that ad, that cookie is modified. And then when you purchase something, there's another cookie, and knitting those cookies together are how we tell that story. What ITP does is blocks the cookies altogether. So we can no longer tell that story. If you are an advertiser, say Kellogg's, and you go to Facebook and you give them $500,000 for ad campaigns, Facebook is now really going to struggle to be able to report to Kellogg's how many boxes of cereal they sold or how many people it motivated to go to the Kellogg website, because now with those cookies gone, we just don't have that kind of insight. And this affects a great number of consumers. It's been couched somewhat in this ad for privacy, as you've seen. It's turned into a little bit of a war of words between Google and Facebook. as Sundar, Google's CEO, has stepped in and fired some shots at Apple. The effects today are limited to Apple device owners, people who are using Safari, and then actually Firefox as well, which followed very quickly. Today, that looks like about 23% of desktop users, 56% of mobile users. And that's where really the vast majority of impact is found, in that over half of mobile users no longer will be depositing these cookies, right, allowing analysts to read them. But what this really did is put Google in a position where Google needed to react, right? With Apple saying we are deleting cookies because we care about privacy, that implied that Google doesn't if they continue to use cookies. And so quickly, Google has come out with an announcement that indeed by the year 2022, they will be eliminating cookies as well. That means cookies are gone. Because there's just a very small percentage of consumers who are using something other than Chrome, Safari, or Firefox today as a browser. In fact, indeed, in mobile, you see it's just 8% of consumers. So 92% of the data that we used to collect that allowed us to tie that story together about ad exposure and leading to sale has now disappeared. What does this mean for the advertiser? It means a lot of things. It means a clear drop in media effectiveness, means an inability to target as effectively as they did before. It means more of a reliance on what we call probabilistic models, as those gaps that I talked about become even wider and wider in the consumer journey. And it also affects the marketing effectiveness and efficiency of those advertisers, as the ability to auto bid and some of the real sophisticated digital marketing techniques that these campaigns and advertisers were relying on no longer become effective. For the analyst, this is a bit of a call to arms. We know through the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning, we can do tremendous things with the vast amounts of data that we can collect. As that amount of data is constricted, machine learning still can become very, very important. In fact, an evolution of it called federated learning, which are machine learning algorithms on top of machine learning algorithms, can actually work very well with even less data. So the idea that we are constricting data can still have a good outcome for analysts as we bring more technology. But the more technology we bring means that the role of the analyst becomes even more important. We're seeing this technology being applied successfully today in things that you might not even recognize as being technologically enabled, right? Travel directions, certainly all of that work is done through machine learning algorithms that are operating with some of the data that that they are collecting. Chatbot functions, when you are speaking in a chatbot to someone that you think is a human on the other side, often that is just a machine who has learned how to interact with consumers, and all of that work comes from machine learning and artificial intelligence, image searches, on and on, the functions that we see today. But one thing that these functions all have in common is that while they are a technology solution, there are still humans who are involved in the application of those things. And that's where the analyst sits today. We have stories that we need to tell, and ranging from the idea of descriptive analysis through to predictive analysis and all the different roles that we still need to play as the data strategist, as the techie, as the data designer. Our role becomes more and more vital as the data we are collecting becomes constricted through the privacy concerns. And indeed, as we've been talking about today, these digital cookies, which we do indeed need, become less and less available for us to use. So while we would love to be able to turn to technological solutions, or there are those among us that I think would, I've always been of the mind that the analyst, the true analyst, brings power as a human who knows how to apply that data. Give me a good analyst with very few tools, and they will beat the bad analyst who has tools aplenty every single day. The challenge that I would give to you all, as the idea of digital cookies become degraded and we start to lose their application, is to invest more in your skills. What this means is that you will have to do more with less as that data becomes more reduced. And that role of the analyst, which has always and hopefully will always be important, I say, is one that you can continue to build through the skills and programs that we talked about at the beginning, to make you that analyst who can be successful today and in the future. I think at that point, we're going to open it up to some questions now.
Yes.
I'll stop my share.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Ron. That was really great. All the talk about cookies and coffee has me longing for a snack after all of this is over. So thank you. A really great discussion. And to our participants out there, we have two tremendous faculty with unmatched industry experience joining us today. So please post your questions in the Q&A. A couple of the questions came in as Ron was wrapping up his talk and going into Kevin's. And Kevin, you've answered some of these questions, but I want to throw out the attendee questions to the two of you anyway, in case you have additional insights. But one is about the regulatory interest in curtailing companies' broad access to consumer data, right? Sometimes achieved through cookies, as you talked about. Do either of you have thoughts on what public policy can be enacted to balance concern with the business case for access to data, and the resulting benefits that can be yielded by consumers? So Kevin, I know you talked a little bit about that as well, but do you see other opportunities or ways that we should be thinking about this from a public policy perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to say, I think what GDPR and certainly what the California initiative have done are fantastic moves forward for consumers. Consumers, all of us, should know exactly who is collecting our data, what they're doing with it, and we should have the opportunity to opt out of that should we care to. I think so regulation there that allows for greater control is good and is the right thing, and I think that's where we see regulation certainly moving. I think what platforms or those companies who are collecting that data need to do a better job of is demonstrating to consumers what that data is used for and what the benefit is. I mean, like I said early on, the digital ads that you see are so important to most companies' operations. Those aren't going to go away. So simply because you decide to opt out or not allow someone to drop a cookie on your desktop, that in no way means that you're going to see fewer advertisements digitally, right? What it'll mean is that you'll see less targeted ads. And if that doesn't matter to you, or if the benefit of those targeted ads doesn't outweigh the privacy concerns that you have, then you have a clear decision, I think, to make there. It's incumbent on the company that wants to collect that data and show you targeted ads to explain to you why that is so important.
Thanks, Kevin. Next up is questions around, what's next, right? And Kevin, I know you talked a little bit about what's next in terms of how analysts need to adapt and prepare for the changes that are already happening and forthcoming. But what other platforms will replace digital cookies? What tools are coming? Do you think that, I suspect the industry is going to respond to this change. We'll see some new innovation. Any thoughts from either of you about what we can be looking for?
Yeah, I think we see a number of solutions out there, and they range from at one end what we would call open measurement to maybe at the other end just more siloed measurement. And so the idea of open measurement is where a governing body acts as the clearinghouse for all consumer data. And so data is provided to them. This could be the WFA has put forward a proposal. There's a couple other industry bodies out there that had said they would love to play this role, right? It's built on trust that Facebook would give this industry body data, that Google would, that television would, all the different marketing touch points and people who are collecting data would allow a central body to take that in. But that is one possible solution that's out there. The other is that, Facebook can measure everything on their platform today, just as Google can measure everything on their platform today. The other solution is that we just get used to a world where there is no cross-platform measurement. It's all just measurement inside each individual platform, and marketers just work with them in a one-off fashion. But those are two at the opposite ends, sort of the spectrum, solutions that are being mulled over, proposed today.
Thanks. An attendee states, I work in the financial services and I'm in a marketing role. I keep getting asked to build a plan for what's coming and how our marketing strategy will be impacted. I can relate. With so many changes and updates, how should we answer these questions and keep up?
I can just echo one thing that Kevin mentioned earlier, and that I've noticed is that it's important for, I think, everyone to become a little bit more data literate. And so gaining skills so that you don't always need cookies, or, you can get data from other sources, but you need to be able to use that effectively. And so I think the more all of us know how to use data instead of relying on Google or Facebook to aggregate that for us and tell us what it means, I think to the extent we can learn a little bit more, then that's one way that you could maybe prepare for that change.
Yeah, that goes back to that superpower, right, Ron?
That's right.
Great. Well, I want to give Kevin and Ron maybe a quick moment for any closing comments. Ron, I know you didn't get a chance to react to Kevin's statements. So if either of you have any closing comments, we'll take a moment for those and then wrap things up here right at 2:30.
Let's see. I just hope in attending some of the other webinars where people think, well, boy, at least for accountants, is this possible for us to learn so much? If we have specializations in data analytics on top of learning the financial reporting standards and everything else, how can we keep up with all of that? And it is a big question, but I think it's just important to recognize that things are changing, and there'll probably be additional specializations that result from our changing world. Just, I don't think we have to know everything. It's just finding something that is that you're passionate about and that you're willing to invest time in. And so if I see that a lot with data analytics, it seems like it's something that is very much related to the gaming mentality, where people get so zoned in, they don't want to do other things. And so if you can find something that you're that passionate about, then I think that's important. And I think it's important to recognize that you can come to love something that you don't now love. If you know it's important, then find a way to be creative in that area. So anyway.
Yeah, I would echo a lot of that. I think the idea that of analytics where we are today is just another step in what has been a quick-moving, fast-growing, evolving industry, right? And the fact that we're wrestling with the cookie question today is just the question of the day. There will be another something that we'll be wrestling with here in the next several months and in years. I think as long as you find your passion to be problem solving. And as long as you enjoy the approach that Ron laid out in his facts framework, if you find interest in that, I think analytics is the perfect place for you. And what I would offer, advice I would offer to anyone, is think about those 3 functional skills. Build your skill as a data strategist, as a techie, as a data designer, and just use those to tee up and tackle the problems, the challenges that businesses are facing today with the use of data. And it's a fun, it's a really exciting ride.
Well, thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Ron. We really appreciate all of your great insights. We are, thrilled to have you on our Geese faculty and have you joining us today. So thank you so much. Thank you as well to all of our participants who joined us for bringing your great questions to the table as well. We hope you gained some valuable knowledge, and we also hope you'll join us for our next webinar, IPOing During a Pandemic, a financial reporting perspective. On January 27th, after the first of the year, Professor Narissa Brown will present on how the current climate has fueled a new wave of IPOs. We look forward to seeing you then and wish you a great day. Thank you.